She was only a child, her small hands trembling as she begged for help, not for herself, but for her sick mother clinging to life. In the chaos of the streets, most would walk past, blind to her pain. But that day she crossed paths with a man whose decision would ripple far beyond that single moment. A leader, a soldier, a figure both feared and admired, faced with a choice that could change everything. What happened next would not only alter her family's fate, but raise a question the world could not ignore. Ibrahim Traoré was no stranger to hardship. Born in Burkina Faso, he rose from the dust of poverty to the front lines of his country's struggles. To many, he was a soldier, a leader, a man carrying the weight of an entire nation on his shoulders. But outside the uniforms and speeches, he was also a human being, someone who had once walked barefoot on the same streets where countless children now fought to survive. That day began like so many others. Crowds pressed through the markets, their faces marked with hunger, resilience, and quiet desperation. It was in this ordinary chaos that a single, fragile figure appeared. A young girl, her eyes hollow, her voice trembling, carrying a plea, far heavier than her small body could bear. She wasn't begging for coins. She was begging for her mother's life. Traoré could have walked past as so many before him had. But in that instant, something shifted. And what happened next would test not only his power as a leader, but his humanity as a man. The child's voice cut through the noise of the street like a cry in the wilderness. At first, it was just another sound in the chaos. Vendors shouting, car horns blaring, feet scuffling across the dirt. But when Traoré's eyes met hers, the world seemed to pause. Her face was streaked with dust and tears, her clothes torn from days of wear. She wasn't asking for food or even money. She was pleading for something no coin could buy, a chance, for her mother to live. In that moment, the weight of Burkina Faso's reality bore down on him. This wasn't an isolated case. It was a mirror of a nation. Millions caught between hunger and hope, illness and neglect, corruption and survival. Every leader before him had promised change, yet families like hers still slipped through the cracks, invisible to those in power. And here, right before his eyes, was the living proof of that failure. But stepping forward meant more than helping a child. It meant challenging a system that thrived on silence. Hospitals that turned away the poor. Officials who lined their pockets while children starved in the streets. Foreign powers that drained the country's resources while pretending to offer aid. To act on this single plea was to ignite a fire far bigger than the girl herself. The soldiers around him shifted uneasily. They knew the risks. A leader who involved himself in the struggles of the powerless often drew enemies in the shadows. Traoré's rise to power had already unsettled those who benefited from the old ways. Every decision was being watched. Every act of compassion could be twisted into weakness, or worse, rebellion. Still, he couldn't ignore her. He saw himself in that child, the barefoot boy he once was, carrying the weight of dreams too heavy for his small frame. Yet, even as he bent down to listen, a silence swept through the crowd. All eyes turned, waiting to see what the young leader would do. Would he walk away, like so many before him? Or would he risk everything to defy the indifference that had defined generations of leaders? The girl's trembling hand clutched his sleeve as if her entire future depended on that grip. And in a way, it did. Because what Traoré chose in the next few seconds wouldn't just decide one family's fate. It would echo across a nation desperate for a sign that someone in power truly cared. And as his soldiers tensed, as the crowd held its breath, as the shadows of the old guard lurked nearby, Traoré prepared to make a decision that could change everything. The street seemed to hold its breath. Traoré knelt beside the girl, her small hand still gripping his sleeve, her voice breaking as she begged for her mother's life. Around them, Whispers rose, swelling into a tense silence. Some saw hope, others saw danger, and in the shadows, those who despised him saw opportunity. For a moment, time slowed. He had faced gunfire before, walked through battlefields, defied powerful nations, but nothing felt as heavy as the weight of this decision. If he acted, he would draw a line in the sand, daring the system of corruption, greed, and indifference to face him head-on. If he walked away, he would become just another name in a long list of leaders who promised change and delivered silence. The child's cry pierced through his hesitation. Her words weren't just a plea, they were an indictment of everything. His people had suffered, and in that instant, he rose. Not as a soldier, not as a politician, but as a man unwilling to bow to injustice. He reached into his own convoy, demanding aid, calling for doctors, ordering resources to be moved then and there. The crowd gasped, because this wasn't symbolic, this was direct defiance. Hospitals were meant to be inaccessible. Resources were meant to be controlled. Leaders weren't supposed to kneel for the powerless, but Traoré did. And in that act, he lit a spark. The soldiers around him braced, scanning the rooftops, watching for the blowback they knew would come. And from the shadows, the old guard seethed. To them, this wasn't compassion, it was rebellion. In the eyes of the people, though, it was something far greater. It was proof that a leader could choose humanity over power. Yet even as the girl was rushed toward the chance of survival, one truth hung heavy in the air. This moment had made him a hero to some, and a target to many more. The girl's mother received the treatment she needed. For her family, that day meant survival, but for Ibrahim Traoré, it meant something much larger. In the eyes of the people, he was no longer just a leader by title. He was a leader by action, a man who refused to look away when faced with the suffering of the powerless. Yet compassion came at a cost. His defiance against a broken system placed a target on his back, corrupt officials whispered. Foreign powers tightened their grip. Every step he took after that moment was shadowed by the knowledge that true change would make him enemies. But the people had seen him act, and once hope is born, it cannot be easily silenced. This story isn't only about one child or one leader. It is about the countless lives caught in the cycle of neglect, about systems designed to overlook those most in need, about the silent injustices that often go unseen until a single act exposes them. Because injustice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it hides in hospitals that turn away the poor, in streets where children beg and go unheard, in leaders who choose comfort over courage. And so the question remains, how many more children must beg before compassion becomes the norm, not the exception? How many more leaders must rise before justice stops depending on chance encounters? This is more than a story of one man's decision. It is a reminder, a call to see what we would rather ignore and to ask ourselves, if power means nothing without humanity, then what kind of leaders and what kind of people do we truly want to be?